Hey, and welcome back. This is the Marketer of the Day podcast. Mr. Luis Báez is here. He is the Global Revenue Enablement Leader. He's an author, a speaker, and a consultant. And Luis is knowledgeable and an expert on some of these fun, exciting topics like being the leader you always wanted to be, how to inspire your employees, build engagement, drive your results, sustainable sales culture, entrepreneurship, so many things. So if these resonate with you, or if these are some problems that you know that you've needed to work on, right? Need to be a better communicator and leader and excite people, then Luis is exactly your man, and he's exactly the person that you want to listen to today. So Luis, glad to be speaking with you.
Thank you, Robert. I appreciate you having me on the show today.
Appreciate you too. And I did my best here to hype you up, to psych us up, to listen to you. But in your own words, what are you all about? What is your focus and your passion?
Yeah, I love to help people reach their highest potential and make their greatest contribution. And I do that individually through coaching. And I do that at scale through some of the programs that I implement for organizations around training and certifications and coaching as well. And so I like to think of myself as there was a point in my career where I was the Olympian. I was the enterprise sales rep closing multi-million dollar deals, working with multiple stakeholders at the table. And I did that for a long time. And now I'm the Olympic trainer. So now I teach other reps how to do what I used to do, because that is the way that I have found that I can make the biggest impact in an organization.
Fun. So you have achieved the success, and then now it is your time to give back and help others. And there's
Yeah.
definitely that value in a sales coach. But what does that entail exactly? Like you hear about these things like role playing or figuring out your process or figuring out your strategy. So when someone says, I need a sales coach and it needs to be Luis, what does that entail?
That typically means that someone or an organization is just really unhappy with the results that they're achieving. They're not hitting their revenue goals. They're plateauing at some point. They're not able to unlock a market opportunity or break into a segment or really connect with a certain buyer persona. And so my job is to come in and sort of diagnose what's going on operationally from a content standpoint and from a skills standpoint, and then start to write a prescription for the person or the organization and saying, these are the skills we've got to up level. These are the areas you want to let go of. These are the investments you want to start making. And then I put together that roadmap for having it come together anywhere from 1 to 6 months, depending on the endeavor. But I step in and I analyze and I strategize before we get going. And to your point, I work with different modalities and different tools. And so you mentioned role playing. If someone is having trouble connecting with the customer, conducting discovery, asking those really straightforward questions, those icky questions about budgets and timelines and things, then you step into my sales dojo. We're going to role play. I'm going to be the customer. I'm going to play nice customer and I'm going to play stubborn customer so that you're prepared to respond to each person in any scenario you step into.
Super cool. And I love your imagination here, right? Where you're saying that there's an element of there's your skills, there's your content, there are segments that you want to break into, there's things that you want to let go of. Maybe you need to
Yeah.
be beaten up a little bit and hit from different angles and try the easy customer and the hard customer. And so when someone comes to you, what's their status? Do they need to throw everything out and restart? Are they missing some of the fundamentals? Does it require some tweaking? Like, what's the before picture look like?
Yeah, a couple of different before pictures. If I'm working with an individual, solopreneur, online business owner, practitioner of a sort, typically what we're discovering is that they don't have a proper sales process. They've developed, a real knack for marketing and email marketing and automation, but when it comes to having direct conversations with people, that's where they start to fumble, or they have conversations, but they don't yield the sort of results that they're looking for. These conversations don't end in closing sales and closing contracts. And so I am typically working with someone who's frustrated because they can't see what they don't know. They don't understand really where to start, and they have trouble sort of assessing, self-assessing where they are. Another scenario is that a group leader steps to me and says, I've got a sales team and we're having trouble getting all our ducks in a row. We're having trouble, marching to the same beat and really starting to, drive the results in market that we're looking for. And I need to figure out how to inspire the culture and the right behaviors and the right skills. right? And so I'll typically step into an organization like that, and that's where I introduce that concept of entrepreneurship, meaning that you show up at the job and not like it's a job, but instead part of, a business that you own. You're a shareholder in the business, you make decisions in the business, the results are driven entirely by you. So I start to step in and implement programs and trainings that start to inspire that sort of self-motivated, higher sales performance culture that every sales leader looks for.
I love it. And I like how it seems to require a shift in mindset, right? Because a lot of
Yeah.
what you consider to be a job, or if you're an employee, is you clock in and then you run out the time and you just kind of go through the motions and do the minimum of what's required of you. But then, as you know, with sales, it requires a lot of like cramming in so much throughout the day. And you hear these stories about these guys that are just like total beasts, right? They
Mhm.
work 16 hours a day. They put out 300 phone calls and they work super hard and they love it and they gamify it and they do all these things to just rise above. And
Mhm.
I just, it took me way too many years to even like really know what sales is. Like we've all heard of sales, but as far as all these things like having leads and a CRM and follow up, it's almost like for me, for all these years, it was so simple that I ignored it. I focused just on the marketing, like you're saying, the landing
Mhm.
pages, the ads, the email copy. And there was this hole in my business for all these years of just like talking to individual people one on one and kind of like moving them along in the process and maybe disqualifying them or figuring out what they want or even following up. And then there's just been so many just processes over the years where I said, I need to follow up with this person 12 times, 16 times over like the course of a year and a half and just be a total obsessive maniac in a good way, just to either just to get someone to the finish line, right? Maybe the finish line
Mhm.
is this isn't for them, they're not going here, or I need to adjust or I need to just recontact them. And so with all this mess, right, all these keywords, buzzwords I've thrown at you, what are people really missing in their sales? Like you mentioned all these things that you
Mhm.
diagnose, but could there
Mhm.
be like a number one top thing that we're
Yeah.
just like, oh my gosh, it's so simple. People are just completely missing this all over the world in sales.
Yeah. Stop selling. I know it's counterintuitive, but stop selling. That's where the friction comes in, is this attachment to this outcome that the conversation that you're having with someone is going to yield in a transaction. It's going to yield in a close. And it doesn't happen that way. Actually, only a small percentage of the leads that you talk to end up being customers, no matter what industry you work in, no matter what segment, right? And so let go of that attachment of like every conversation has to result in a sale. And instead, step in as a consultant and help that person, either see, learn, or experience something new for themselves that helps them make an informed decision about whether they're making the right investment. And by being that person that stops selling and is instead in their corner, looking out for their best interest, being that co-pilot that's calling out all the potholes on the road, right? By stepping into that role, that's where you start to have actually more fun and where the customer starts to let their hair down. Right. And so a lot of the things that you described to me, working really long hours and doing the most, that's what I used to do until I stepped into enterprise sales. And I had to have more strategic conversations that were aligned psychographically with the person that I was speaking to. Right. If I'm selling to a business owner, a CMO, a sales director, these conversations have to be nuanced and they have to be tailored for each of these individuals' specific interest in that business. So my conversation can't be generalized. It has to be really specific. If I'm sitting down with the CMO, for example, I need to understand like where are you losing sleep? Where are you bleeding cash? Where is the disconnect? What have you tried? Right. And ultimately, how is this, resulting for your team in terms of like that connective tissue with the sales team? Right. Those are going to be the pointed questions that I sit down and ask a CMO when I'm consulting them, when I consider what their actual problems are versus hanging on to this anxiety of, I've got to close, I've got to close.
I love your thought process here of just like of having these customized conversations and
Mhm.
asking them questions, looking for the pothole, solving their problems. And so how do you balance that with like meeting your KPIs too? Because we've heard all these things, right? Like be
Yeah.
a be a gentle giant and to,
Yeah.
have this abundance mindset. And so, and don't try to force this sale, but like have many conversations and get this so dialed in that when you come across this sort of prospect, this client, and they're this type of person and they have these needs, like you're there to help them and you know what they want. And but then is it fair to say like maybe there's like another aspect of the personality, or like there's times when you say like, okay, well, I also like want my metrics to be high as well.
Hmm. Yeah, it's a fine balance. It's like the art and the science of selling, right? That you have to walk that sort of tightrope. And I think that you see results through consistency. And so let's pull on the thread that I just started around sort of being buyer persona focused, right? I'm going through this exercise of sitting down with one CMO and asking them a series of questions to help me assess whether what I have to offer is a good fit for them. Well, what if I focus the rest of my week on just connecting with other marketing leaders? What if the product that I have to sell historically sells really well with this audience? And so rather than trying to boil the ocean, I'm just going to flutter around in one pond. Just hang out with the marketing folks, have as many conversations with as many marketing folks as possible that result in positive outcomes, meaning a next meeting, consideration, a demo, a review of a proposal, etc. Right? That is how I would think about moving, right? There are these pressures to do the most and deliver a lot and move really fast. But I think that there's a way to be really methodical and focused. And you can, look at the velocity and the volume without distracting yourself by speaking to too many people and sort of code switching and context switching too much in your sales process. But yeah, leverage the data that's available to you, right? Like whether you're running your own business or you're stepping into someone else's business and helping to grow it, there is some data around like what's worked, what kind of customers buy, what their titles are, what their concerns are, and the typical ways that they object to making the purchase in the first place, right? They're going to have the same hesitations and the same questions. So make sure that all of your scripts, your content, your flow, the way that you show up is all tailored for that and being very methodical that way.
I love it. I love the consistency idea and
Mhm.
to minimize the context switching. And it is sort of
Yeah.
reassuring, right? To have this data that you're talking about and saying, well,
Yeah.
if I have this number of conversations, then I know that it will lead to this. So I just need to make sure to meet my quota, so to speak, not
Mm.
necessarily my like sales quota, but just like talking to enough people and having enough activity and doing enough every day or every week just to make sure that this velocity sort of exists and it seems to take the pressure off. And I got my wife into selling maybe in the past few years because she narrates audiobooks and I say, hey, there's this like LinkedIn's real developed now and people on LinkedIn like
Yeah.
want to be sold to, and you find this certain type and you start the conversation and you figure out kind of your script or your sequence and lead
Mhm.
them to this and then just kind of move things along. And there's some of the counterintuitiveness has kind of revealed itself, but it's fun. And so things like lag time, right? Which like you like people can tell you and you can hear about this, but then there's this like, idea that you do all this work and then it doesn't really feel like it leads to much. And then later
Mhm.
on, then it pays off. But then sometimes it's your mind completely tricks on you because you say, well, maybe I should take a break or dial back, or I got these kind of unearned sales, but it's just from all the work that you set up and you said, well, hey, here's my system, here's my rules, here's what I told myself that I would do, and I just go ahead and do some of this activity. So kind of along those lines, like, is there any sort of like counterintuitiveness or surprises that you've noticed in all your years and all your experiences? What just really defies logic?
Gosh, slowing down, right? I know that there's a lot of pressure. I know that especially in this macroeconomic climate, there's, the pickings seem, really slim at times. The pressure is really high. But the thing is that your sale, your deal with someone, your conversation will completely unravel if you haven't slowed down to take that moment to ask those really thorough questions, right? If you, for example, are a month into working a deal, but you've never asked, hey, have you ever invested this way? I operate on a monthly retainer. of 2,500, 5,000 a month. Have you ever allocated this kind of budget for a service? Have you ever paid someone on retainer on a monthly basis? The answer to that question will help you understand whatever sort of psychological hurdle that needs to be overcome in presenting whatever it is that you have to offer, right? So that you're not 1 month into a conversation, everything seems really aligned, but then you introduce this concept of a retainer, and the customer goes, actually, I'm not comfortable with this arrangement. I've never actually engaged with someone on this level in this way. Right. And so I want to invite folks to understand that the gaps, the vulnerabilities and the risks in your deals happen when you don't slow down and ask that question. Leave nothing to assumption. And make sure to ask, everything from, do you buy this way? Are you used to buying this way? Have you ever spent this much? What else do you spend on? Who else are you considering? Are you talking to any other agencies or service providers or software companies, right? Like, I just want to understand where you are in your process and understand who I'm up against.
I like that. I love some of the careful phrasing and just the way that you frame some of these things, right? Like understanding who I'm up against and asking these questions and making sure that they're comfortable with these things, like, for example, like their retainer. And so I imagine, and you mentioned earlier about this idea of the potholes. And so I imagine that in selling, there's all sorts of like minefields, so to speak, right? Like all sorts of ways to go wrong. Like you don't set up these questions ahead of time. And then maybe there's also the fear in like talking to the wrong people or in a lot of like wasted time. Like again, you're flashing me back to when I had my wife started doing some of these Zoom calls, then she would kind of make I don't know if it's a mistake, but fall into the trap of this customer just like asking question after question and maybe like they're asking like the wrong question. They're asking like kind of technical questions and kind of stringing along, and that prospect of kind of adding to the confusion, right? And I think there was a situation where it's like my wife was offering like a done for you service, and this prospect was kind of just trying to figure out how it's done, and my wife was just kind of answering the questions, and then this prospect ended up getting this mountain of information and then kind of talking themselves out of the sale and ended up not even getting the problem solved anyway, just like adding to the noise. And so, is there anything come to mind as far as like what to avoid in selling other than like 50,000 different things? Like, is there anything that we should really be on the lookout as far as
Yeah.
traps or mistakes to avoid doing?
I think overselling is actually the biggest mistake that people make. They get nervous because, there's an awkward silence on a call or in a conversation, and they feel like they need to fill that void with whatever knowledge they have in an industry or a product or whatever. They feel that need to flex their expertise. In that moment, what you're doing is you're taking the spotlight away from the prospect or from the customer, and you're putting it on yourself and your anxieties, right? And so I think that have that moment of like questioning yourself is like, am I overselling? And I think that, this day and age, I always like to use the metaphor of like purchasing a smartphone, right? You walk into the Apple store, you ask for an iPhone. The thing that you're concerned about is like, does it work? Will I be able to text? Can I post selfies on Instagram? Can I call grandma? Like, I just need to know these very like simple functional things will happen, in a really seamless and simple way. However, if you step in and you're having a conversation and someone says to you, yeah, we have 1,000 patented technologies in the iPhone at these many gigaflops and these many gigahertz and this much RAM, right? If you load the conversation with technical jargon that pulls that person away from this is what I want, this is what I need, this is what I came for, because you oversell, what you end up doing is overwhelming that person and you're not going to get the sale. Right. So, however sophisticated or complex or holistic what you have to offer might be, you actually don't need to sell someone on everything you've got to offer, just the 2 or 3 problems that you can immediately solve with what you have to offer. And let that person enjoy that delightful surprise of that longevity in their investment. Oh, wow, there's another feature, there's another layer to this service, there's another layer to this support that I didn't even think about. Wow, I'm glad that you did. I'm so happy I invested with you.
Wonderful. And I'm making a mental note. You said, is this what I want, what I need, and what I came for? And I think that's
Mhm.
really powerful. And it takes maybe a while to figure out some of these ideas, right? To figure out that
Yeah.
the features and the technical specifications, that's great, but that probably isn't the deciding factor. It might be like a nice to have, but it's not going to make or break. And they want their problem solved. They want this good feeling. They want to put it to use. And then there's also that kind of counterintuitive idea of, well, don't talk so much, right? And don't try to fill the space. And if you haven't done the all the sales calls and the reps and had the self-awareness and had the adjusting and had a coach like you of maybe pointing out some of these invisible problems, then we might be making these mistakes without even realizing, right? Like if there's the awkward silence on the call, that's okay. I feel like my whole life is awkward silences. There's not that big of a deal, but we need to kind of sometimes counteract, override our natural programming because we do sometimes let the anxiety when we do sometimes make some of these mistakes. And so it's great to hear about a little bit of it, hear about your process and your mindset and some of the little stories that you've told. And so if someone here is listening to the podcast and they say, hey, this is all a great start, right? These are all great ideas. Well, you're talking about like that entrepreneurship kind of work ethic you mentioned before and being a nice person and solving problems and asking questions. And they say, okay, it's a nice start, but then where does Luis come in? How can he help me in my business with some of these things like the sales coaching? How does somebody know if they're a right fit for you, to use that selling concept, but also how do they know if they're a right fit and how can they contact you and find out more to maybe explore this?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. So I think the important thing to recognize is first things first, dissatisfaction with your revenues. If you feel like you're making your best effort and leaving it all on the table and you're still not getting the kind of revenues and sales and income that you deserve, that's your first sign to think about hiring me. The second thing is if you're the type of person that shies away from numbers. So if the thought of like tracking your leads, tracking your conversion rates, even as I'm saying this, if you're getting like the heebie-jeebies, that is certainly a sign to hire someone like me to step in and just do all of that for you and guide you through it in the simplest way. And I think that the other thing is that if you are having trouble showing up authentically in the way that you do business, and you're also concerned about overcoming, all the stigma around using AI in business, and you want there to be more of a human presence in the way that people engage with your business, that's also a hint to hire someone like me to step in. And the best way to get started in partnering with me is actually to look at my playbook. I actually offer a 14-day leadership and sales academy where I bottle all that secret sauce, all that entrepreneurial and entrepreneurial juice, and I put it on the shelf for you so you can have a taste of it. And I lay out all my sort of day by day playbooks for how to improve yourself, improve your process, and also improve the way that you engage with your team. You can sign up for free at learnfromluis.com.
Fantastic. Learnfromluis.com. That's LearnFron or FROMLUIS.com. And the N and
Yep.
M, it's easy to get mixed up there. So, and yeah, and this is wonderful just to kind of get inside your head a little bit and figure out how the gears turn and how you're all about the diagnosis, right? And you're saying it's not just, hey, get this, solve this problem. You're saying, hey, if you feel this way, if the numbers make you anxious, if you don't feel good, then that's okay because Luis can jump in and fill that gap for you. The stigma of AI, of feeling like you could be better, dissatisfied with your revenues, it's very problem solution. And I'm kind of just making a mental note as far as from the messaging aspect, right? It's kind of fun to think in those terms of saying like, well, you try to hit someone over the head with a solution or a feature and you're saying, hey, back up and think about like, well, what's the problem, and back up again, and what's the feeling that is really the problem in disguise. It's fun to play around with some of the ideas and the abstract concepts and the imagination. And so we said learn from Luis.com is the place to claim this playbook, to get some of these points, and to make some progress on some of this. And you're also Luis Baez on LinkedIn. That's Luis, last name Baez. And so as we're wrapping up our conversation here, Luis, you've kind of taken us on a journey from the selling mindset and the how to be a better worker and how to be a communicator and solve these problems. In all of your adventures and experiences, is there a fun quote or lesson that you think could really help us out as we wrap up our conversation?
Gosh, wow. Probably not as fun, but it's something that certainly, when I think about like what it means to be an entrepreneur, self-motivated, there's a quote that someone said to me once that I hated, but I now adopt. It's called, basically, it's excuses are the tools of idiots, right? You are too smart to be using excuses. And so ask the question, get the help, hire the resources, right? Do whatever it takes, and make a smarter decision other than making excuses.
Time to do it. Enough excuses, get the help. And the place to get that help is learnfromluis.com. And thank you very much, Luis, for stopping by and wowing us, amazing us, and giving us this helpful advice.
I appreciate you, Robert.